Dating as far back as Neolithic times, communities built hill forts to defend themselves. Maintaining high ground was an advantage. They built palisades of sharpened timbers as barriers, and beyond them ditches to hamper any assault. These are still evident today. The Scottish Brach dates back to the Iron Age, 1 century BC. Once the expansion of the Roman Empire reached England, indigenous peoples were forced north and west to the highlands and mountainous regions. The Romans, unable to defeat these tribes of Picts and Welsh, drew the dividing line of their empire literally by constructing fortifications like Hadrian's Wall. Of course, the Chinese Qin Empire had the same idea, but on a much grander scale. The Romans were astute fort builders, often utilizing the foundations or blockwork of earlier builders, continuing and elaborating on their work. This was partly because the placement of forts and castles to defend territory or overlook terrain had well been understood. The placement of forts often depended on the terrain, high ground, rocky outcrops, commanding positions. Defensively, forts and castles were places of refuge and needed to be large enough to accommodate many. But as offensive bastions constructed in enemy territory to influence and control regions, they became the centers of power. Regional rulers would make them their place of abode, and the castle was born. True castles began to be built in the late 800s. These included wooden and stone structures, often built on Roman structures and fortifications. Generally, these structures consisted of residential halls and rooms built of timber, surrounded with a protective wall, usually of rock and stone. Some examples of this early medieval castle design survive in Italy. The realm of the Franks then dominated the times under the Carolingian dynasty and set about enforcing their rule with forts and defensive works, all under the control of royalty. Due to invasion from Vikings and Magyars and the decline of the Central Empire to defend them, more towns and monasteries began to fortify. More castles dotted the European landscape. Their central timber halls were replaced with stonework and slate roofs. As the feudal system emerged, castles began to focus local power and authority in their regions of influence. England became aware of these structures in the early 11th century, with their conquest by the Normans, who brought castle construction with them. Throughout Europe and China, strongholds and feudal palaces sprang up. The earliest record of a castle in Britain is contained in the Bayeux Tapestry. One prominent form of castle design in Britain, Ireland and France of the 11th century was the relatively cheap and easy to construct motte and bailey. These were effective at repelling smaller attacks. Basically, a mound of earth taken from a ditch forms a small hill, where a keep is constructed either of wood or later of stone. A wall surrounds the keep from within the ditch's realm. The bailey is an enclosed courtyard, usually surrounded with a palisade or wooden fence and overlooked by the motte. Castles could have more than one bailey. The bailey would often contain a hall and living quarters for servants or farmers, and stables. It would also be connected to the motte with a drawbridge. The keep was the central tower, usually built on the motte, and served as the final redoubt in defense. It was often the accommodation for the owner, but could also function as a secure storage area or even a prison. One of the more famous prison keeps is the Tower of London. Situated on the Thames in the centre of London, the keep now houses the crown jewels. Some early castles were simple towers surrounded by a wall. The enclosed court area, or bailey, delineated by the enceinte or interior walls. It was often topped with a walkway around the outer wall for defense. The weakest point of any castle was the main gate. This was remedied with a gatehouse and some form of removable or drawbridge, doors and portcullis. Sophisticated gatehouse designs enable a defender to trap an enemy within the gatehouse and attack them with arrow and spear from slits in the walls called murder holes. Later fixtures to castles were machicolations built into the stonework overhanging the outer walls. Hot liquids or stones could be dropped on an enemy. The most familiar castle design element is the crenellations and merlons. They are the regular gaps in the battlements along the top of outer walls, allowing for archers to fire down at an enemy, then step aside for full protection behind the merlon.